Conclusion 1. The cultural impact of Paul McCartney, 1970 to 2020. That the Beatles were at the center of popular culture in the 1960s is almost a universal given. Nearly all overviews of the 60s recognize the musical and cultural importance of the band. They generated global interest as chirpy working-class exports from Liverpool in the early years, but soon evolved into a formidable musical force. Not only did the Beatles lead the way in albums such as Rubber Soul, Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, but they influenced fashion and had a more than a peripheral influence on wider trends, such as the demonstrations against the Vietnam War or the 1967 Summer of Love. As the years progressed, the band seemed to both act as a mirror to events and a catalyst for wider social change. When the 60s came to a close, the Beatles dissolved and former members headed their separate ways. The fact that the group's dissolution coincided with the end of the decade makes the Beatles' association with the 60s all the more stark. It has been argued that the Beatles almost personify the decade. As Bob Spitz, the author of The Beatles, the biography explains, "The Beatles' story is all of our stories. It is about how the youth culture emerged, the drug culture emerged, how politics rose to the fore as a universal debate. It's about rebellion, it's about the growth of the British entertainment system, the growth of the rock and roll entertainment system. The Beatles changed music forever. They took rock and roll from a medium that was about cars and girls and gave it context, interesting chord changes, and true musicianship. Few people would argue that as a solo artist, or a member of Wings, Paul McCartney held the same sort of sway over the next 5 decades. However, it would also be true to say that McCartney's influence in this period has been more than marginal. For a start, his career over this time has been almost uninterrupted. As we have seen, unlike other ex-Beatles, McCartney chose to keep creating music. Every other band member had some sort of extended sabbatical within this time frame. As one of the world's most famous and photographed personalities, he has maintained a presence in the world's media from the early 1960s until the present day. The number of column inches, or more recently, web pages devoted to Paul McCartney over this period must be of an astronomical order. If we take the meaning of culture to include the media, it would be fair to say that McCartney has been a looming presence. He has regularly appeared on television since the beginning of the 1970s. Each new song or album release has been accompanied by either promotional films, later called videos, or appearances on such popular programs as Top of the Pops in the UK. In 1977-8, the video for Mull of Kintyre dominated our screens, as did We All Stand Together in 1984-5. Even during a self-imposed break from performance after 1980, McCartney headlined a number of live TV events, such as Live Aid in 1985 or the Prince's Trust concert in 1986. These special occasions seem to be all the more common in later years, namely the Queen's Jubilee concert in 2002. Live 8 in 2005, and the opening ceremony for the London Olympics in 2012. Like him or loathe him, McCartney has been a constant presence in popular culture over the last half-century, and there must be very few people who are unable to put a name to his face. Unlike other stars who have come and gone, McCartney has always very much been with us. This omnipresence no doubt stems from a personal craving for attention and approval. The desire to be at the heart of the media seems to be written into his DNA. McCartney has enjoyed sustained chart success since the breakup of the Beatles. Nearly every album has made a significant impact. Out of all of his releases, only 3 albums failed to make it into the top 10 in Britain. Wildlife reached number 11, Driving Rain reached 46, and Choba BCCCP reached 63, but was more along the lines of an official bootleg. Even the 2 albums often thought to be less successful than the norm, Back to the Egg and Press to Play, reached numbers 6 and 8, respectively. In terms of singles, there has been less consistency, but few outright flops. Songs that failed to reach the top 50 are uncommon and sometimes surprising in terms of their quality. For example, London Town reached 62 in the UK, Getting Closer 60, Tug of War 53, and Pretty Little Head 76. On the other side of the coin, the vast majority of McCartney's releases have been successful by any other artist's standards. Band on the Run was the top-selling album for the UK in 1974. In the 1980s, Tug of War sold several million copies and included the #1 hit Ebony and Ivory. In the 1990s, Flaming Pie became McCartney's first top 10 album since Tug of War and was certified gold both sides of the Atlantic. More recently, Egypt Station topped the charts in the US. Chart success is not necessarily a measure of musical influence. It stands to reason that vast swathes of the population have bought McCartney's albums and singles over the years. But does this mean that he has guided musical fashions and shaped the direction of music over the decades? The evidence in this regard is admittedly more tangential. In every introductory contexts chapter in this book, McCartney's work has been compared to the prevailing trends, in an attempt to discover his part in the overall pop music culture. It is hard to make a strong case that McCartney was one of the major driving forces in each decade in the same way that the Beatles shaped the 1960s. For example, in the 1970s, disco flowered as a natural progression from Motown, using soulful vocals and rich string arrangements, but imbuing them with a more impulsive eighth-note rhythm based on open and closed hi-hats. McCartney incorporated a disco feel into some of his 70s hits, such as Silly Love Songs and Good Night Tonight. However, his work in Wings has little real impact on the development of dance music in the period. McCartney channeled his interest in rock music on many occasions in Wings and as a solo artist. Songs such as Let Me Roll It, Soily, Letting Go and Beware My Love certainly demonstrate the rockier side of Wings for a band often characterized as being on the softer edge of the rock and pop spectrum. However, although these songs feature overdrive and guitar riffs and solos, and a strong snare backbeat, they don't move the rock genre forward or set a standard for other groups to follow. In terms of 70s rock, it would be fair to say that bands like Led Zeppelin and X/DC were the leaders, and other bands tended to follow in their path. Another musical trend identified in the 1970s was that of the prog rock album, where a whole LP seemed to be influenced by one specific theme, such as the Genesis album Selling England by the Pound, which deals with the theme of commercialism versus naturalism. Prog rock albums tended to feature lengthy instrumental sections with unusual instrumentation. For example, the 23-minute-long Echoes from Pink Floyd's Medal album from 1971. Band on the Run has been held up as an example of a concept album, but it is hardly in the mold of LPs such as Pink Floyd's The Wall, 1979. There is perhaps an underlying theme, of sorts, to Band on the Run, though. As Denny Lane has commented, I know what we were going through at the time. Paul had this idea of a band on the road that's always going from gig to gig. Band on the Run. Time to Hide, it's the same kind of thing. You need to be going forward. That's the band attitude. You are only as good as your last gig. I think that's what that song is about. In terms of the long, meandering instrumentals often found in the prog rock genre, the song that perhaps comes closest to this style is Loop, First Indian on the Moon, from Red Rose Speedway in 1973. At 4:24, the track is nowhere near as long as other prog rock instrumentals of the period, but does contain a number of vocal chant sound effects, electronic noises, and a fairly involved bass guitar part. As McCartney commented, but then we've got something like Loop where it was sort of a bit of fun for us. It's pretty experimental. Despite the fact that McCartney did not play a key role in influencing musical trends, Wings did have their own unique and identifiable character. The Wings sound was based on the vocal harmonies of Paul and Linda McCartney and Denny Laine, and can be heard to best effect in tracks such as Silly Love Songs, My Love Kintyre, My Love and London Town. Unlike all male vocal harmony groups such as the Bee Gees or Queen, the contribution of Linda McCartney created a unique soundscape that set Wings apart from other bands. The harmonies of Wings in their setting of melodic pop soft rock represent one of the most enduring of musical trademarks in the 1970s. Moving into the 1980s, McCartney made an early foray into the world of electronic music in McCartney 2. However, the album stands apart from other seminal electronic albums of the period. McCartney 2 is at times eccentric and sometimes childlike, in songs such as Bogey Music and Frozen Jape. Albums that are often singled out as being influential in the period include Computer World by Kraftwerk, 1981, Organization by Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, 1980, Dare by the Human League, 1981, and Remain in Light by Talking Heads, 1980, which combines electronica with a vast range of musical styles. The trend for electronic sounds and drum machines made little or no impact on McCartney's next run of albums, Tug of War, Pipes of Peace and Give My Regards to Broad Street. They were produced by George Martin, who lent a classic and lush sheen to songs such as Tug of War, Ballroom Dancing and Through Our Love. When McCartney did embrace the sounds and production values of the decade in the album Press to Play, the result was far from an unmitigated success. Sales were uncharacteristically low. The production team and collaborators, with hindsight, were unhappy, and it is fair to say that a significant portion of McCartney's fan base has never warmed to the album. McCartney's subsequent album, Flowers in the Dirt, marked a very self-conscious retreat back to the classic songwriting formula of the Beatles era, and the Hofner bass was taken off the shelf and dusted down for service. The choice of Elvis Costello as a collaborator seemed to represent a move to the combination of cynic and optimist that had made the Lennon-McCartney team such a resounding success. From this point on, McCartney seemed happier to play to his own strengths and focus on songwriting and a time-honored tradition. Although genres came and went, ranging from house to hip-hop and trance, McCartney's work at the beginning of the 1990s made no tangible reference to the Happy Mondays, Acid House or the Second Summer of Love. From the mid-1990s, with renewed interest in the work of the Beatles after the anthology and the singles Free as a Bird and Real Love in 1996, McCartney fully embraced his past once again. Coincidentally, bands in the 1990s had already begun to draw on the music of their parents' generation. Oasis scored huge global success with the unashamedly Beatlesque albums Definitely Maybe and What's the Story, Morning Glory. After the 1980s electronic surge, it seemed that the wheel had turned full circle. The album Flaming Pie from 1997 in many ways harked back to this theme. Jeff Lynne was brought on board after his work on the Beatles anthology, and George Martin was used to lend an orchestral touch to the songs Some Days and Beautiful Night. The formula worked, and Flaming Pie became one of the most acclaimed albums in McCartney's career. This focus on classic songwriting, with a general indifference to contemporary trends, continued after the millennium. The albums Driving Rain, Chaos and Creation and Memory Almost Full featured the usual combination of songs focused on the guitar or piano, with Chaos and Creation having perhaps more of an orientation towards the piano, on songs such as Anyway and This Never Happened Before. Always keen to experiment, new sounds and instruments making incursions into his albums, such as an autoharp on Too Much Rain, or mandolin on Dance Tonight. The song Only Mama Knows on Memory Almost Full bore a resemblance to some of the rockier songs of Wings. It is perhaps only in the last decade that McCartney has made more self-conscious concessions to contemporary music. The collaboration with Kanye West represents the first time since his partnership with Michael Jackson in the 80s that he has collaborated with artists at the pinnacle of global fame. The song FUHU on Egypt Station is a track that embraces contemporary pop stylings. The choice of Ryan Tedder as producer for this work was more than the result of chance or good fortune. McCartney seems determined to have one last stab at creating a smash hit, perhaps in a desire to be seen as relevant in a fast-changing music landscape. However, despite his best efforts, FUHU did little to secure McCartney's place among other pop luminaries, such as Katy Perry, Rihanna or Justin Timberlake. It would be fair to conclude that McCartney's impact since the 1980s is more a matter of maintaining the craft of songwriting, rather than being at the heart of contemporary musical trends. In this respect, it is best to judge his influence from more of a personal perspective. Countless thousands of aspiring songwriters and musicians have studied his music and played along to his songs, before embarking on their own careers in the music business. It is hard to get a handle on how many composers and songwriters have been influenced by McCartney, and in what way they have learned from the skills of a proven master of the trade. This is particularly true because most of the literature about McCartney is based on his career in the Beatles. There is no shortage of anecdotes from musicians who were influenced in the 1960s, or by younger musicians who were inspired by the Beatles at a later date. Pinning down the influence of McCartney's career after the Beatles is more of a challenging task. For this reason I have enlisted the help of a sample of musicians and songwriters who share how McCartney's post-Beatles career has impacted their musical development. In assessing McCartney's cultural impact over the past half-century, it is important not to forget that he is a performing as well as a recording artist. Whereas John Lennon and George Harrison were happy to spend the majority of their post-Beatles careers focused on studio work, McCartney has spent a large part of his time on the road. He was determined to make Wings a gigging band soon after the release of Wildlife. Wings cut its teeth through a series of low-profile university gigs in 1972. This developed into a full-blown tour of Europe that was filmed for posterity on The Bruce McMouse Show. As Jeff Britton relates in his interview, the time spent in Nashville in 1974 and the film One Hand Clapping were undertaken with a view to an extensive tour. The 1975-6 Wings Over the World tour that eventually transpired became a torchbearer for other live acts in the decade. The tour encompassed 66 venues across North America, Australia, and Europe and was attended by over 1 million fans. After an extended break from touring in the early 1980s, McCartney was back on the road at the end of the decade. The concert at the Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro in April 1990 broke a new world record for its 184,000 attendees. The new millennium began with a similar thirst for live work, and over the past 20 years, McCartney has brought his music to millions of people across the globe, performing in such diverse locations as Uruguay, Japan, Russia, Israel, and Ukraine. The sheer scope and ambition of such concerts reinforces the true global influence of the artist. As we have seen in previous chapters, McCartney's excursions in the field of classical music have always generated a flurry of interest. Sell-out premieres and records that have consistently reached #1 in the classical charts. However, classical music is very much an art form concerned with the long game, that is, works that have outlasted the time of their inception, and are still performed many decades or centuries later. Are McCartney's classical works likely to achieve such lasting influence? Although we cannot know for sure, the early signs are that works such as Liverpool Oratorio, Standing Stone and Ecology are known among followers of classical music for particular movements within the entire piece. The longer works are rarely performed in their entirety, but highlights within each piece do appear on a regular basis on classical music radio stations, such as Classic FM in the UK. It is perhaps inevitable that this has happened. McCartney's skill over the last 6 decades has concerned the writing of short melodies. As Richard Rodney Bennett explains in the documentary for Standing Stone, the concept of development in classical music takes a lifetime to learn. Bennett goes on to explain that McCartney won't mind him pointing this out, but it is the idea of development that as a hallmark of classical music. and one that sustains a listener's interest over the course of a symphony, concerto, or oratorio. Paul McCartney has always had an interest in visual art. When he was 11, he used a school prize to buy a modern art book, including works by Dali and Picasso. At the age of 14, he won an art prize for a drawing of St. Aidan's Church, Speke. Following the astronomical success of the Beatles, McCartney moved to London in 1963 and met John Dunbar, the art critic for The Scotsman, and the gallery owner Robert Fraser. Describing his friendship with Fraser, McCartney observed, "Once I got to know Robert, a nice thing would be going to the gallery and helping install an exhibition. Just sit around and smoke a bit of pot, helping. Play a little music for him. At Indica we did a lot of that, too, and a lot of fun we had." Indica Gallery was below the Indica Bookshop, in the Westminster district of London, where John Lennon famously met Yoko Ono during one of her art exhibitions in 1966. McCartney had helped to set up Indica's bookshop and gallery, and when not immersed with the Beatles, was a frequent visitor and customer. McCartney collected a number of paintings from this time, including works by the French surrealist painter Magritte. He also commissioned a work by the pop artist Peter Blake for the living room of his new home in St John's Wood, London. McCartney's friendship with Blake was, of course, instrumental in getting the artist to design the iconic Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band sleeve in 1967. Those who have visited McCartney's offices in Soho Square, London, might spot a large figure drawing by the pre-Raphaelite Edward Burne-Jones at the foot of the stairs. At the end of the 1970s, McCartney formed a friendship with the Dutch-American abstract expressionist artist Willem de Kooning, who was a client of Linda's father's law firm. De Kooning reignited in McCartney a thirst for painting. As McCartney explained, "Seeing someone like him draw, seeing someone like him paint, being there in his studio, seeing his attitude, has given me quite a buzz." McCartney took up painting again in the 1980s, but his second hobby was unknown to the world until an exhibition of 70 of his paintings took place at the Leis Art Forum, Siegen, Germany in 1999. In 1992, the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool presented the art of Paul McCartney to the public. This collection included quite a wide range of themes, some of which were abstract, such as Black Scratch, 1994, others were closer to home, for example, Yellow Linda with Piano, 1988. Some were outright weird, such as Bowie Spewing, 1990. The church in Speke reappears in Paul's 1990 painting, Home Territory, along with his childhood homes in Western Avenue and Firth Line Road. As well as paintings, the exhibition included photographs and natural wood sculptures. Opinions about McCartney's paintings have been somewhat mixed, but he has been unfailingly modest about his accomplishments. "I'm slightly embarrassed by it. It would be so much easier to be a musician. But I do enjoy it, and I don't see anything wrong with it." Aside from painting, McCartney is also a fan of cartoon-style line drawings. Occasionally, a signature for fans on albums or books is accompanied by a small sketch of a cartoon face in his unmistakable style. Unsurprisingly, such autographs sell for well above the normal asking price of around $1,000 for a fully authenticated signature. In their book Paul McCartney Composer/Artist, 1981, a whole host of these types of sketches can be seen, accompanying the sheet music for a number of his most significant songs during and after the Beatles era. There is no doubt that Paul McCartney's relationship with Linda McCartney intensified his awareness of the visual arts. Linda McCartney had been a keen photographer since the 1960s and was assigned to capture some of the world's most prominent musicians at work, and snapped Eric Clapton for the front cover of Rolling Stone magazine in May 1968. Her work during the period can be seen in the 1988 collection, Linda McCartney's 60s, Portrait of an Era. Unsurprisingly, Linda's photography played a part in many of her husband's album covers. McCartney I features a bowl of cherries, and the inner gatefold sleeve showcases 21 family snapshots. The back sleeve is a picture of the baby Mary McCartney tucked inside Paul McCartney's fur-lined jacket. The gatefold sleeve for Ram 1971 is a vivid combination of Linda McCartney's photographs of her husband plus the obligatory animals with vivid colouring and sketches by Paul McCartney. Although album art has since dwindled in importance, in the 70s and 80s the LP sleeve was very much a part of the entire package. Paul and Linda McCartney were happy to pass the duties of cover design to other renowned photographers when Linda needed to be in the shot. The iconic Band on the Run sleeve was the work of Clive Arrowsmith and taken at Osterley Park, West London. The English art design group Hypnosis, who had been responsible for the design of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, worked with Paul and Linda on the sleeves for Venus and Mars, Wings Greatest and Back to the Egg. The soft focus photograph of Paul and Linda on the front of Press to Play was provided by George Hurrell, who used the same box camera that he used in Hollywood in the 1930s to capture movie stars including Clark Gable and Greta Garbo. The inner gatefold sleeve of Press to Play features a unique concept: Paul McCartney's panoramic sketches for the songs on the album, showing where instruments are placed in reference to the left and right speakers of a stereo system. McCartney's latest album, Egypt Station, showcases a painting from 1988 of the same title. The themes and styles of the painting were expanded to create an elaborate 6-panel concertina-style packaging for the CD issue and gatefold sleeve for the vinyl by the designers Firigu and Gary Card. The artwork for the cover of Egypt Station also formed the basis for the video for the lead single, I Don't Know. It is a remarkable work of animation, bringing alive many eccentric figures and creatures from the composer's imagination. The project would, of course, have been overseen by McCartney, who has always expressed an interest in video art and animation. As McCartney explained to the interviewer Magenta Divine in 1988, I used to go with my mother down to a place in Liverpool called the Tatler, where they showed non-stop cartoons all day. I used to sit in there all day. McCartney went on to list his favourite animated films, which included Luxo Jr. by John Lasseter, Seaside Woman by Oscar Grillo, Rupert and the Frog Song by Jeff Dunbar, and Tex Avery by John Needham. Two of his choices, Seaside Woman and Rupert and the Frog Song, were, of course, based on his own or Linda's music. Seaside Woman had been written by Linda McCartney in 1971 after a family visit to Jamaica. The reggae song was performed by Wings in their University Tour and Europe Tour of 1972 and was recorded in 1974 under the pseudonym Susie and the Red Stripes, in reference to the Jamaican Red Stripe beer brand. Paul and Linda commissioned animation for the song from Oscar Grillo in 1980, which went on to win the short film Palme d'Or at the 1980s Cannes Film Festival. Another animation based on the music of Linda McCartney was Oriental Nightfish, which was the work of Ian Ems. The track was originally being recorded by Paul and Linda and Denny Lane. Ems provides an amusing account of the animation's inception. I got pissed off whiskey and put the music on as loud as it would go. The whiskey did indeed help. And I came up with this weird idea where alien forces enter this building. This woman with blonde hair is penetrated, got naked and inhabited by the alien force, then she's replicated, before becoming a comet that explodes. The film was a bit weird, scary and a little bit sexual. Yet it was later put on Paul McCartney's Rupert the Bear video for children. The kids who watched it years ago are now in their 20s, and they've set up an internet site called The Oriental Nightfish Haunted My Childhood. Out of all of Paul or Linda McCartney's animations, Rupert and the Frog Song made the greatest impact. McCartney had gained the rights to Rupert the Bear, a much-loved character from a British national newspaper shortly after the breakup of the Beatles. He had worked on a number of songs through the 70s that had been intended for a film project that never materialized. Eventually, work began on the Frog Song project in 1981, and the animation film by Jeff Dunbar was screened from 1984 as the short for McCartney's ill-fated Give My Regards to Broad Street. The shortened video of the song galvanized the song We All Stand Together, which reached third place in the UK singles charts. The full 13-minute animation was combined with Seaside Woman and Oriental Nightfish and went on to become the biggest-selling VHS video in 1985 in the UK. It also won a UK BAFTA for Best Animated Short Film. In September 2004, the film was re-released on DVD format in the Paul McCartney Music and Animation Collection. Also in this collection were two more shorts by Jeff Dunbar, Tuesday and Tropic Island Hum. Tropic Island Hum concerns the adventures of Whittle the Squirrel, and all the voices for the characters are provided by Paul and Linda McCartney. McCartney's music for Tropical Island Hum is a lively and upbeat calypso song. Tuesday is another frog-based story in which the creatures magically take off into the air at the same time each week. The story for Tuesday is taken from the 1991 wordless picture book by David Wisner, which must have inspired McCartney to embark on the project. McCartney's soundtrack to Tuesday is a classical composition performed by the London Symphony Orchestra. In 1998, McCartney fans were treated to the long-awaited release of the Bruce McMouse Show, a film of Wings' 1972 tour that is interspersed with animated shots of a family of mice who live below the floorboards of a concert theatre. Again, all of the voices are provided by McCartney, and near the end of the film, McCartney meets the mice and holds the father of the family in the palm of his hand. The vast majority of animations encapsulate Paul and Linda McCartney's sentimental attachment to all manner of creatures from the animal kingdom. Moreover, these films lay bare Paul McCartney's childlike inner spirit, which most adults are all too keen to renounce. He has never lost the ability to let his imagination run wild, whether conjuring up a host of make-believe characters or devising a new magical setting. It is hard to imagine that any other rock star in the 1970s would have made a film about a family of animated mice. Certainly, it is not an idea that John Lennon would have entertained. But, as many commentators over the years have noted, it was Lennon's propensity towards cynicism and McCartney's inclination towards whimsy that made the pair such a perfect match. Whittle the Squirrel also appears in the book, Up in the Clouds, written with the assistance of the author Phil Parder and published in 2005. The children's book has an ecological theme, as Whittle's home is destroyed by human development, which leads him to the secret animal sanctuary of Animalia. It was reported at the time that the book would be made into an animated film by the Gaumont Film Company. McCartney is believed to have written 8 or 9 songs for the film, but as of 2019, the project has yet to materialize. McCartney's latest children's book is Hey Grandjude 2019, which was illustrated by Catherine Durst and published by Penguin. The book seems to have an autobiographical element, as the main character is a guitar-playing grandfather who, with the help of a magic compass, takes his grandchildren on a number of magical adventures. It is hardly surprising that with McCartney's keen interest in the visual arts and animation, he has played a pivotal role in the planning and execution of his many promotional videos over the years. A great music video manages to capture something of the essence of a song, enhancing its appeal in an original or inventive manner. A number of McCartney's videos fulfill this criteria and undoubtedly help to push the song in question up the singles charts. The video for Mull of Kintyre was filmed at Sadell Bay in front of a small cottage, which is still very much in existence. When the song changes key to D major, Paul and Linda McCartney look towards Sadell Castle, and the Campbelltown Pipe Band can be seen approaching across the sands, led by a baton-twirling pipe major. It is a moment of expressive brilliance, and the video perfectly captures the emotion and atmosphere of the occasion. The rousing chorus at the end of the song, achieved by means of yet another key change, is reflected in a campfire sing-along at the end of the video. This scene imparts an atmosphere of joyous communality and conjures notions of hogmanay, whiskey and high spirits. the very essence of Highland celebration. The 1984 video for Pipes of Peace is another superlative example of the marriage between music and cinematography. Like Mull of Kintyre, Pipes of Peace reached number 1 in the UK singles charts, and the song's video undoubtedly contributed to its success. McCartney dresses as both a British and German soldier who fraternize, exchange gifts and play football together during the famous 1914 Christmas truce. After a shell blast, both sides are forced to retreat to their trenches and the soldiers realize that they are still holding on to each other's family pictures. This moment in the video is a powerful symbol of common family values between both soldiers. For a moment, the notion of shared humanity rises above the arbitrary military divisions of war. The video for Pipes of Peace was shot on Cobham Common, Surrey. Although the song Pretty Little Head from Press to Play, 1986, was not a chart success, it is worth seeking out as a prime example of the art of the music video. It was directed by Steve Barron and is a moodily atmospheric portrait of a girl who, troubled by quarreling parents, decides to flee from home. The video is shot in black and white and the concept of sympathetic background is given a surrealist spin when rain pelts down on the squabbling parents inside their house. The young girl's suitcase is the only item to appear at the beginning of the video in color, as a way of attaching symbolic importance. It almost seems to anticipate the girl in the red coat in Steven Spielberg's 1993 portrayal of the Holocaust, Schindler's List. In fact, in Pretty Little Head, the girl's coat soon takes on a vibrant blue hue as she flees over hostile terrain. McCartney sings to the fugitive through an assortment of animated billboard screens. A giant McCartney then blows away a group of shadowy assailants. The video suddenly switches to the girl drying her hair in her bedroom and a giant silhouette of her parents kiss above the home, with a yellow radiance emanating from each window. The viewer is left wondering if the girl had been experiencing a nightmare, of if McCartney's intervention had somehow put things right in her once dysfunctional home. It is a shame that after such thought and expense had been lavished on the video, the song only reached 76th place in the UK charts and then sank without trace. However, the video was later released as part of the 2007 triple DVD set, The McCartney Years. Probably the biggest artistic disappointment for McCartney during the 1980s was the critical and commercial failure of his film Give My Regards to Broad Street. For many years McCartney had aimed to make a feature film, originally commissioning the Liverpool dramatist Willie Russell. As Russell explains, I was invited to Scotland by Paul McCartney in the mid-1970s because he was interested in making a film with wings and wanted me to see if I could come up with a plot. Which I did, but it didn't go ahead in the end. It was when they were recording Back to the Egg and I asked Paul for a set of lyrics to work with. In the end, McCartney decided to write his own screenplay for a film. With the benefit of hindsight, to script write, produce, and star in a film about a day in the life of himself was a recipe for disaster. It removed any element of objective oversight to the whole project. Deprived of another pair of eyes or anybody with the nerve to call him out, the film was universally panned by the critics. Jim Washburn, writing in the Register, commented that Broad Street's climax was safer than sleeping pills and cheaper than a lobotomy. Despite the film's setbacks, it holds a place in the hearts of McCartney fans, who tend to view it as an expensive music video rather than a piece of serious cinematography. Moreover, it spawned the hit song No More Lonely Nights, which is undoubtedly up amongst McCartney's best songs from the 80s, if not from his entire career. McCartney's song lyrics can be viewed in their own right as poetry that can be understood without reference to music. This was the approach taken through much of the 2002 book, Blackbird Singing, Poems and Lyrics, 1965 to 1999. The book is edited by the Liverpool poet Adrian Mitchell, who comments, I have chosen the best of Paul's poems and song lyrics. It's been a delight apart from the inclusion of song lyrics such as In Liverpool, Heart of the Country, Mull of Kintyre and Golden Earth Girl. A number of poems were written specially for the book. Some poems, such as Toy Story, are ambiguous and quite abstract. Others, such as Dinner Tickets, are autobiographical. In this case, it relates how McCartney's mother found a drawing of a naked woman in the pocket of his school shirt. The young McCartney subsequently admits that he had drawn the offending image. The book sold well, as anything branch of the arts with the McCartney name to it generates interest. However, not all of the critics were enamored of the results. It could be argued that poetry and song lyrics are altogether different beasts, and the great poem is rarely achieved through the simple process of stripping a song of its music. As John Kinsler commented in The Observer, reading the song lyrics, you can't help singing them in your head, which detracts from the poetic experience in some way, where the language generates its own music. As it happens, it is an archival document and disembodied songbook of some interest. Aside from the arts, McCartney has held influence in a number of other fields. He has capitalized on his A-list celebrity status to lend support to a number of causes over the past 5 decades. Perhaps most prominent in this regard involves his move to promote vegetarian causes since the early 1980s. At the time of the release of Once Upon a Long Ago, the couple were interviewed on British television by Terry Wogan. Wogan, is there anything specific, I'll ask you both, you'd like to achieve in the next 20 years? Linda McCartney, for me, it's more the old thing. Peace on earth and stop eating animals. It's really what I'm interested in. Wogan, vegetarians can often be portrayed as cranks. Linda McCartney, I just love animals and I don't believe in eating them, that's all. Audience applause. Paul McCartney, my ambitions are along the same sort of lines. In subsequent years, Linda McCartney in particular became a prominent spokesperson for both vegetarianism and animal rights. A series of best-selling vegetarian cookbooks were released, including Linda McCartney's Home Cooking, 1989, Linda's Kitchen, Simple and Inspiring Recipes for Meals Without Meat, 1995, and Linda's Summer Kitchen, 1997. In 1991, a frozen range of foods was established under her name, Linda McCartney Foods, which sells products based on TVP or textured vegetable protein. The brand is still a leading player in frozen vegetarian foods across the UK, a rapidly increasing market given current dietary trends. The baton was more recently passed on to McCartney's daughter, Mary, who published her own book, Food, Vegetarian and Home Cooking, in 2012. As part of a drive to tempt meat eaters to gradually change their diet, the McCartney family devised the Meat-Free Monday campaign. In 2016, the Meat-Free Monday cookbook was published and credited to Paul, Mary and Stella McCartney. Over the past 30 or so years, the whole of the McCartney family have played a pivotal role in steering the public to question the moral, health and environmental impact of a diet that involves the slaughter of animals. McCartney's stance on vegetarianism is of course tied in with the issue of animal rights in general. Although McCartney never owned a pet as a child, he acquired the dog Martha while in the Beatles, and his companionship with the Old English sheepdog inspired the Wild album song Martha My Dear. After forming a relationship with Linda McCartney in 1968, the pair formed a mutual appreciation and love of animals. Their pets and livestock included a flock of sheep on their Mull of Kintyre farm, horses, and more dogs who accompanied Wings and the Van for the university tour of 1972. The McCartney championed causes of animals' rights and conservationism from the early days of Wings, first notably expressed in the album Untitled track Wildlife. During the Wings Over Europe tour in 1973, the song Wildlife was accompanied by a large cinematic backdrop film that showed the gradual encroachment of modern life on natural habitats. The use of footage as part of a concert tour was taken to a more extreme and graphic level by the time of the New World Tour in 1993, where a film about the practice of whaling and animal testing was shown to audiences and was later included on the Paul is Living concert on the New World Tour video in 1994. The video had to contain a warning about the harrowing nature of the footage. At one point in the film, McCartney can be seen carrying a Greenpeace banner. Another example of animal rights activism from the McCartneys is the song Looking for Changes on the 1993 Off the Ground album. The song promotes the mantra of changes in the way we treat our fellow creatures and decries a number of practices in the name of science or laboratory research, such as a cat with the machine in its brain and a rabbit with its eyes full of tears. As McCartney explained in the New World Tour program, I thought I'd better try to write a protest song. And that's not easy. I've shied away from it. Rock and roll's much easier, the straight ahead thing like I'm down way back. But I thought I'd try something more pointed. I looked at animal experiments and took 3 of them. More recently, in 2019, the song was used with the blessing of McCartney for a better campaign against animal experimentation. A new animated video was commissioned and depicts McCartney singing and playing the guitar, interspersed with cartoon images from the song's lyrics. McCartney's long-standing association with PETA resulted in the video Glass Walls from 2009. He provides narration to a video depiction of abuses in the UK livestock industry, and is based on the premise that if slaughterhouses had glass walls, meat eaters would see the wrongdoing and would be unlikely to countenance eating meat again. McCartney has lent his name to other causes over the past 50 years. At the beginning of this period he caused controversy after supporting Irish nationalism with Wings' first single in 1972, the song Give Ireland Back to the Irish in 1972. It was promptly banned by the BBC, but still managed to reach 16th place in the UK charts. Although McCartney has never openly expressed his political allegiances, it is safe to assume that he leans towards the socialist side of the spectrum. This is all the more likely because in the UK, the right-wing Conservative Party had been the traditional supporters of fox hunting and other blood sports, where animals are abused in the name of upholding historic rural values. Moreover, McCartney made a conscious decision to keep his children in the UK state education system rather than put them through private schools. This can be viewed as an act of continued solidarity with his working-class Liverpool roots. As he explained, I always feared the day they'd come back from a posh school, saying, "Hello, Peter, how are you?" and start to look down on me. McCartney has voiced his admiration for those devoid of any trappings of wealth or affectation. I must say that I've never met anyone better than those working-class people. And I've met a few, including the Prime Minister of this fair country. Not any of them has come near to some of those people that I'm from. The closest that McCartney has come to openly expressing a political stance in the UK was with the release of the song All My Trials in 1990. It is a traditional American folk song, with spiritual overtones that has been associated with social protest. More than the song itself, McCartney's video seemed to be a critique of the UK in the era of Thatcherism, with shots of homelessness and the effects of NHS hospital closures. The song's timing could not have been more fitting. It was released on the 26th of November 1990, 4 days after Margaret Thatcher had resigned as Prime Minister. As McCartney related to Wogan, "In actual fact, we just started off liking the song and then we put a video to it and it suddenly seemed to have a more powerful message, because we used things like homeless people and NHS closures in the video to show the trials, and the timing was right when Maggie got dumped, which we couldn't have possibly known about." In the same interview, McCartney addresses head-on whether his vast wealth disqualifies him from being able to take a stand. "Some people said to me, 'Look, you've got a lot of money, you're disqualified from talking about the homeless because you're well off.' Which I think's mad. Probably the more money you've got, the more you've got to talk about the homeless, I would have thought." Another issue that McCartney lent his support to in the 1990s was that of ecology, embracing such issues as deforestation, climate change and pollution. The song Big Boys Bickering was released as the B-side of Hope of Deliverance in December 1992. Unusually, it contains the expletive, "Big Boys Bickering," fucking it up for everyone. The big boys in question were the attendees of the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit in June of the same year. Key players such as President George H.W. Bush refused to sign key charters, such as the proposed Convention on Biological Diversity. As McCartney related in the New World Tour program, "But when you think of the ozone layer being depleted, a 50-mile hole over the world that's going to kill us if we don't do something, and then you think of what happened at the Rio summit. Do you think of that as a flipping hole or a fucking hole?" McCartney never quite matched this level of bold political statement after the early 1990s. The end of the New World Tour in 1993 perhaps deprived Paul and Linda McCartney of a political platform that they could take around the world. During the mid-1990s, McCartney's time was more focused on the studio, first with the Anthology project and then with Flaming Pie and Standing Stone. Understandably, at the end of the decade, Paul McCartney's emotional energies would have been directed towards nursing his ailing wife. After Linda's death in 1998, her pro-animal rights vitriol was given one final airing with the posthumous release of her album Wild Prairie, which had been recorded even during the last weeks of her life. The song The White-Coated Man deals with the issue of vivisection. Another song, Cow, is concerned with slaughter in the meat industry. Both songs were written in collaboration with Carla Lane, a prominent English television writer and fellow animal rights activist. Paul McCartney helped to produce all of the songs on the album. After the millennium, McCartney still clung on to his ecological and vegetarian principles, although they were never given the explicit airing that had been a feature of the New World Tour. With Heather Mills, McCartney gave voice to the problem of landmines. The issue was pertinent to Mills, as she had lost her leg below the knee as the result of a car accident in 1993. During the Driving World and Back in the World tours from 2002-03, McCartney regularly sported a red t-shirt emblazoned with the slogan "No More Landmines," and the pair lent their support to the Adopt a Minefield campaign. As a part of his visit to Moscow for the Red Square concert in May 2003, McCartney and Mills met with Vladimir Putin to discuss Russia's stance on landmines. McCartney viewed landmines as an unwelcome remnant of war. The more you look into it, the more it's really shocking, because some of them are made to look like toys, so kids pick these things up. After McCartney's marriage to Mills ended in 2008, the landmines issue took a backseat in tours and campaigns. But it can be assumed that he still lends at least tacit support to the campaign to abolish landmines. At the time of writing, November 2019, McCartney has devoted a part of his website to a causes blog, and entries include a message from Paul: "Less meat equals less heat." Paul supports Climate Week. And Paul contributes to Refugee Auction. McCartney is not completely mute about current political issues. Although he has not passed public comment on the right-wing Conservative government of Britain from 2010, the song, despite repeated warnings from Egypt Station, is thought to be a slur against the US presidency of Donald Trump, and in particular, his denial of the contested concept of climate change. But Trump, definitely. It's more about anyone who would deny climate change. Why no, I'm married to an American, I go to America a lot, and I have a lot of American family, American friends, and we tend to be liberal. But there's one or two that you don't talk to if you're out having dinner, 'cause you know they're gonna stick up for him. The concept of climate change does seem to be conspicuously avoided during recent interviews. Topics of conversation are routinely steered towards his time in the Beatles, dealing with fame, and his relationship with John Lennon. Perhaps McCartney and his management team are aware that, given his almost constant touring over the past 2 decades, calls for a reduction in carbon consumption may be perceived as a double standard. In assessing the cultural impact of Paul McCartney since 1970, it soon becomes apparent that there is much more to the man than his songs. McCartney has chosen to maintain an almost continuous presence in the media for the past 5 decades. His uninterrupted high profile has meant that his many enterprises have been met with intense media interest. Whatever he turns his hands to will sell, simply because it bears his hallmark. His legions of fans across the world will push something as passé as an oratorio back into the cultural mainstream. A cynic could argue his success in other fields is down to his name alone. While there is an element of truth in this stance, some of his endeavors do have merit in their own right. Although many of his longer classical pieces have failed to gain traction, movements within these works enjoy popular airplay. Although his paintings may never be destined to hang in the most prominent galleries in the world, his art on albums such as Egypt Station stands comparison with some of the best examples of LP art. As McCartney seems to live and breathe music, it is hardly surprising that his most successful artistic accomplishments have a direct link with his songs. The music video has not yet gained the level of artistic stature that places it on a pedestal with examples of high art. However, there is no denying that videos for songs like McCartney and Pipes of Peace are effective and manage to elevate McCartney's craft to yet another level of artistic excellence. As pop music is an expression of popular culture, to overlook the music video and television as a means of cultural dissemination would be an act of extreme short-sightedness. Just as the film of the Beatles arriving at JFK Airport or performing at the Washington Coliseum is an integral part of the early Beatles experience, the video of the Campbelltown Pipe Band marching across the white sands of Saddell Beach is indivisible from the whole experience of McCartney. McCartney has always thrived when his natural passion for animals, animation and storytelling have cohered into a whole. For this reason, the short Rupert and the Frog song usurped the place in the hearts and minds of the British public that had been set aside for the feature film Give My Regards to Broad Street. It is in the field of animal rights and vegetarianism that McCartney will be most remembered for in terms of his campaigning. Not only has he put most of his energies into this cause, but to the general public it is obvious that his motives are both heartfelt and sincere. It almost goes without saying that McCartney will be most remembered for his remarkable songwriting abilities both during and after the Beatles. McCartney's role after 1970 has been more one of craftsman than innovator. Sticking to what he does best has brought more consistent results than attempting to follow the signature styles and musical trends of each decade. Finally, as McCartney fast approaches his 80th year, it is often remarked that he stands as a role model for staying remarkably youthful, in mind, body and spirit. In such a way, McCartney continues to act as an inspiration for the art of life itself.